Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest is Søren Pedersen. So Søren, if you could give a little bit of your background and where you're at and what you're doing now, and we'll kick things off.
Sure. Thank you, Tony. As you said, my name is Søren, and I'm calling in from Denmark, a small Scandinavian country at the northern part of Europe. For the past 15 years, I've been part of the IT industry in a couple of interesting large companies. I've done products for Bang & Olufsen, which is a high-end audio brand. And, like 10 years ago, we already started automating and doing kind of DevOps things without really knowing. We're going down that path, continuous integration and so on. And later on, I spent 3 years at Lego, which is a quite famous company in the big world, building their Lego.com homepage, helping them move along to a cloud solution and sustaining the whole DevOps concept in Lego, bridging between development and operations. So that's kind of my background. And then for the past 4 years, I've been an independent consultant where I help companies realize the benefits of DevOps and Agile and really bring some more development pace and efficiency into their setups.
Okay. I was, way back, in a former life, so probably it's 15 years ago now. I was a security consultant, security architect. I was on the security side of the fence instead of being on the marketing and journalism side of the fence. And one of my jobs, when I was at EDS, was the developers would create an application, and then I would do a security assessment of it, and that security assessment was like the second to the last step before it was supposed to be released to production. So basically, they've gathered requirements, they've done their development, they've gone through all of these things, and at the very end, they hand it to me and they say, "Hey, can you assess this and let us know how it is from a security perspective?" And and at that point, it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? If I find a bunch of flaws, now I'm the bad guy telling you that you have to scrap everything you just spent 6 months on and go back to ground zero. And my boss told me at the time, he was like, "Look, we're not trying to be the roadblock here per se. We're not going to be the ones to tell them you can't release this. What we are going to do is document the issues and tell them and basically say, if you release this, these are the risks you're accepting." Like, I'm just letting you know this is what's wrong with it, and that's on you now. So when I told you before we started recording that a number of years ago, my friend Alan Schimmel called me up. He said, "Hey, I'm launching this thing called DevOps.com. What do you know about DevOps?" And at the time, I didn't know anything. And as I looked into it, my initial thought was, wow, this is such an improvement over what we were doing when I was because of the continuous nature of it. And I actually, and it's funny because I actually wrote at least one, I think more than one article, kind of making fun of, in a nice way, making fun of the use of continuous. Like, everything is continuous. It's continuous integration. It's continuous development. It's continuous security. It's continuous monitoring. It's like, and that's kind of like the hallmark of DevOps, is that it's continuous. But definitely an improvement. Just the ability to, instead of having a beginning of a project and saying, okay, we're going to define the requirements and we're going to we're going to build this software, and then at the end we're going to release it. This mindset of, it's kind of a living thing, and we're going to keep on developing it and keep on reiterating, and there isn't this like 9-month development life cycle before you can release the product again, because that was the other thing we had, is that if whatever changes I would introduce, like if the security assessment came to me and I said, okay, you can't release this because it's got this flaw, that would be something they would include in like the next 6 month roadmap, 6 month release or whatever. And so the whole process, 15 years ago was bad.
I totally agree, and I think you're so right that the continuous part is so huge in DevOps right now that it almost seems like a kind of churn, which perhaps isn't too nice. But I think one of the great things that really came with DevOps is the mentality of shifting left. And now that you mentioned the security topic, I fluently recognize the whole thing where you go through a lot of development and you get to the end stage and somebody says, yeah, but guys, really, you should have thought about this, this, and this. And I think the power in DevOps comes in where we start considering this as something upfront and continuous, as you stated, where you were engaged much earlier. And in my time in Lego as a company, there was a really good security expert who would enable us as teams to conduct some of the security aspects and put in like a red light thing. So when you're exceeding these kind of boundaries, you need to have them in upfront. And otherwise, if you do these assessments and behave nicely, then you're pretty okay on that term. And I think that's a really, really good thing about DevOps, because you're starting to bridge those parts of your development process. And obviously, operations is the second part, right?
Well, and I because my background is security, I view things through that lens, and so yeah, I mean, it was funny because initially my thought was, yeah, I don't know how security admins are going to feel about DevOps, because just like development had 6-month or 9-month milestones, and that's when those were the production release dates or whatever. Mm-hmm. Security at the time, security 5-10 years ago was built around basically stability, basically saying, I've put these things in place and now I need everything to not change. That's how I know it's secure, because I've given you your laptop. I know exactly what applications are on it. I need you to not mess with that. I know, and so to introduce the concept of things are going to constantly change, I think was definitely a culture shift from a security perspective. But when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, but it's a really good culture shift, because instead of saying, hey, I have found this problem, hopefully we can work on that and get it into the release for 6 months from now, I can say, hey, I found this problem, we can fix it by lunch.
Yeah, for sure, and it opens up a lot of doors for rapidly fixing your issues, whether they are security or bugs or whatever. I think one of the challenges I have been really a bit astounded by is the understanding of that by going faster, deploying faster, you have to come to a point where you realize that you're actually reducing risk quite significantly compared to your old approach, where you'd say, okay, the way I reduce risk is I build a big list, I continuously monitor and track and try to mitigate. Sometimes you just have to accept the risk, like you said. This is a security risk you're okay to release for all I care, but you should be aware of. And I think that has been the hardest part in transforming organizations, getting to that kind of mindset and understanding at the bottom line. And especially if you're not a hardcore DevOps developer kind of guy, right? It doesn't make sense. You're so used to the other way of working, right?
Right. Well, and when so again, I view things through the lens of security, but when you look at it, there are benefits. It's not just for security. So like, let's say you put out some software and people start to use it, and immediately hopefully you've done some sort of alpha beta testing, and you had some focus groups and whatever. But when you release it to production and more people start using it, you identify new issues, and maybe all of a sudden it comes up that someone tries to use it in a different way than you anticipated, and they come back and they say, hey, you know what, you really needed there needs to be a button that does this. Mm-hmm. And so just like with security, like the ability to just add that feature, to go back in and say, okay, let's fix that, and have that be fixed in a day or two, as opposed to at the end of the year, is huge. And I don't know that it's directly related or related at all to DevOps, but the world in general switched to the constant update model. To me, even before Alan Schimmel called me up, and even before I heard of DevOps, it was the smartphone. It was having an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever that to me kind of changed that model of, well, we don't have to wait for there to be like a whole new version of this. We can just push out updates that regular basis that change the functionality. And then you look at what Microsoft did going from Windows 7 to whatever, and now with Windows 10, it's like once upon a time there was like the once every year or once every 18 months they'd release a security pack, and that was like this massive install. And or you'd have a couple security packs and then you'd have to get a new version of Windows, and it was like always a major thing. And now with Windows 10, it's like they just add features. All of a sudden you get a little update and there's some new stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, as you said, the smartphone market really pushed the boundaries on that one, because they created this whole sandbox environment and marketplace where companies could deliver. But the security case, I want to share an experience I had. So in my days in Bang & Olufsen, where we did embedded hardware and firmware, shipped it to customers, high-end customers who would just return the portfolio if they were disagreeing with what we're doing, we had the case of the Heartbleed vulnerability coming out on the Linux cores. And had we not taken the path of being DevOps and automating a lot of stuff and trying to do things in a good manner, we would not have been able to respond to that vulnerability within a few days in a global market space. And I think that's a good proof of why you really need to get into this motion and get into the mindset where you actually don't see it as a risk, but an opportunity to release software often and respond to critical errors in the market.
Yeah. When I was, I told you that I used to write much more frequently and much on the topic of DevOps, and now I don't as much. So I still follow it, but not nearly as much as I used to. But when I was writing about it frequently, it was newer. I mean, at that point, it was still sort of cutting edge for companies to be doing DevOps, and and obviously over the last 5-6 years or whatever, it's become much more mainstream, and pretty much everybody is on board on some level. But one of the things that one of the things at the time, and I think it's still somewhat true, is there was this struggle to even define, well, what is DevOps, and the thing is, it kind of meant different things to different organizations, and I think what started off as really purely it's got dev right in the name. What started off as just a kind of an evolution of from waterfall to agile to DevOps in terms of development and what that meant, and the intersection of where development was going with, at the same time, infrastructure itself becoming more software based and infrastructure as code and that kind of thing. It really kind of changes the game from a development perspective. But companies have then taken the concept of DevOps, the concept of removing silos and breaking down barriers and empowering people to just go do things, and applied it at the whole company level. Like, it doesn't matter. You're in human resources, you're in accounting, wherever you're working, you can still apply some of the cultural aspects of DevOps. So I'm curious, like, when you say you're doing independent consulting, as you work with companies, what do you see? Like, do different companies have different perspectives, and when you walk in the door, do you have to first try to kind of gauge, well, what do they think DevOps is, or help them understand, or what's the current state of that?
Yeah. So my typical experience entering a company is when they're starting to go into the DevOps track. And I think the adoption rate is quite higher in the States than in Europe, where I'm at. But that is, first of all, making sense of all of it, because it's a very large theme, and companies are often slightly confused. They tend to lean towards the Dev and Ops part of the whole theory and setup. But in reality, when we have the talks, they understand that we're actually talking a lot more culture and a lot more about behavior and leadership than we're talking about moving bits and bytes from a developer to a server nowadays. Because DevOps, in my mind, has grown quite a bit from being just dev and ops trying to fix the trenches between those two departments, and into, you can also get the DevSecOps and the DevSec ML ops and naming right. And in essence, we're looking for bridging organization. We're looking to remove all the waste generated by having silos or center of excellence and departmental responsibilities, and move that into a shared context where we all work towards the same target of satisfying our customers. And that is a guy just recently said to me, that's quite an eye-opener, because I just thought it was about automating the delivery pipeline. And that's not what DevOps is today.
Right.
But for sure, it started in the other part, right?
Right. Well, and there are obviously a variety of tools and services out there that you can use for automation and integration, and you can use Chef and Puppet and just whatever, like all these tools out there. But one of the things that I think was sort of challenging for a lot of companies is there wasn't a simple, like, okay, I want to do DevOps. Sell me the DevOps product. What do I buy? It's like,
yeah, for sure.
There was no, I'm going to go online and I'm just going to go buy some DevOps. Like that's not a thing you can do, because it really is yes, there are tools that facilitate it, but it really is more about the culture and the mindset, in my opinion. I feel like you can have DevOps. You can embrace DevOps culturally without some of the tools, but if you have the tools and you don't have the culture, it's not going to work.
Yeah, for sure. So one client I'm seeing currently, they have a mainframe environment, and obviously the tool chain is not as fully developed as if you'd go into a cloud environment where you have all the deployments, you have the infrastructure as code and so on, right? But we're still taking the path of getting, obviously, automation into place. But we are also a lot talking about how we're going to shape the culture and grow into an experimentation and learning focused organization in the long run. And, one of my experiences in Lego was obviously the same, because they're highly developed and very skilled technically. But they had the split between Dev and Ops. And the first thing I had to fix was to fix the relationship between our marketing developers and the operations team. And the way I sought to fix that was to spend 2 days a week for the first half year in the operations team, building the connections, having the discussions, understanding who they were and where they're coming from, and addressing some of their concerns, to take those back to my part of the business and grow that kind of network across. So I think that's what people tend to realize when they get into this track.
Okay. I know, like one of the things that you work with clients on, and one of the things you kind of focus on, have to do with maturity assessments, capability assessments. Mm-hmm. So give me like the high level, like, when you go into a company, like what's the value for them? Like, why should they have these things in place? How does it help them?
Yeah. So as many companies move in different directions, and they really want to know where they stand. And since we're dealing with, of course, we look at the technology base and we look at the stuff they do and so on, but we also do a cultural assessment. And that means taking apart the research behind the door report reconstructing that into actual questions where we get a maturity measurement of their current setup. And then we feed that back into the organization and tell them, okay, so if we observe what you're doing and when we ask your organization what is really going on, you're kind of around this level. And typically that's in a scale of 1 to 5, where they can say, okay, what does this mean and what do we need to do to move on from there? Unfortunately, it's growing right now. There's not a lot of this stuff in the DevOps domain. I think the DevOps Institute just released a model of their own. So it's quite specified for each company and how you do that. But that really builds an opportunity for the clients to select where they would put their emphasis when we explain what that means and what it does in terms of efficiency and reducing certain parts of waste in the organization.
Okay.
And that's a fixed service, you could say.
Well, yeah, I think that's the I think something like a maturity assessment is important. For a number of different sort of elements in a company, not just their DevOps. I think a lot of times companies try to do things that they read about, or they hear, oh, that's the new cutting edge thing, we should do that, like there's an executive somewhere who's heard of this thing, and so you just kind of go, oh, okay, I guess we're going to go do that. But a lot of times you do have to step back and kind of and say, okay, well, but what do we hope to get from it, and where are we at? Do we have the pieces in place to actually do this effectively, and what do we hope to achieve out of this? And I know that it comes up frequently. I've seen the conversation a number of times revolving around bug bounties. Companies like, should you have a bug bounty program? And it's like, well, bug bounty programs are great, but your organization has to be prepared to address those. Having a bug bounty program, like if you don't have the pieces in place to communicate effectively and to take in what people are finding and do something with that knowledge to fix it and address those problems, then just saying you have a bug bounty program doesn't really solve anything.
No, for sure. And I think the maturity assessments we do often, so we usually express them with the 5 levels, and it tells people what we expect from the next level, right? So that really builds a way to understand and grow a path for them to follow in that organization. And since we're dealing with a cultural change mostly in organizations, we really advise not to aim for a maturity level. We tend to rather recommend that that's your continuous engagement of where your organization is going and where you're heading, and then do very focused initiatives in the organization, building capabilities and making sure people are starting to move in the direction you want to go. And with the bug programs, it's like anything else. If you do it wrong, people will game it, and they'll tend to find bugs and stuff, which is really not helping your business either, right?
Right. Are there, I said earlier that I don't feel like there's an actual DevOps tool, there isn't like a DevOps in a box you can just buy. But there are, I think, a handful of tools that are sort of like, okay, but you should have these pieces. You should have you should have this sort of automation for your development pipeline. You should there are certain things that make sense. And I remember too that as DevOps became more mainstream, it very quickly went from this focus on DevOps and automation to all the conversation being around containers, and it went from containers to container orchestration and Kubernetes, and that seemed to be kind of where things ended up. But my question is sort of, what tools do you think an organization should have? Like what are the pieces that a company needs to have in place?
So first and foremost, and I think that's so basic that mostly all companies have it today, you need a very good version control system, right? You need to have a steer on what you're building and how you're combining that code at some point. Then you need a pipeline for building, running your tests, your scripts, and everything else, so you can get to the continuous integration part. And then you need a setup where you can start delivering, and that's where I see the whole cloud part and infrastructure as a code, or containers, or even maybe functions as a service might be the level you're at. Those start to become required in my viewpoint. And if you can't get those bits and pieces into a line where you can prove the quality of your product efficiently and continuously, to revert to that word, then you're not going to become DevOps at any point. You might do things in an agile way and so on, but that's at the core of it. And now we start to see some more value stream aligned tools come out. I think Protora just released some of their stuff, and they're kind of leading that field. And that's where I think we'll see the next step in the DevOps journey, where you start integrating much more of the value stream and observing the business results of what we're really doing in DevOps. But that's still new ground for me, at least.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like the it does get. I guess I can't really say it gets overused. Like, it is the right word. I mean, but when it comes to the continuous, and the thing is that those it just makes sense when you look at it, that the things that you're trying to do, like again, I'm going to fall back on security. At one point in time, we did antivirus signature updates, like once a month, and then it was once a week, and then it was once a day, and it's like, okay, but viruses are coming out, thousands per minute, per hour. It's like, basically, as soon as you would release the signature update, you were already out of date. And the same with like vulnerability scans. You used to do vulnerability scans, once a year or once a quarter or once a month, and it's like, okay, well, so you know what your vulnerabilities were, on June 1st, but if you don't run the scan again until October 1st or whatever, then it's kind of useless. And it's like, so you need the continuousness. You need to be continually doing vulnerability scans, continually looking at and monitoring security, and it applies on the development side too. Like, why would you want to wait a week or a month to do those?
No. Absolutely agree. And I think I probably overlooked that one, because having an OWASP or whatever security tooling you have available at your company in your value stream, it should just be part of what we're doing, because that way you keep track of your solution and make sure you don't inadvertently introduce something that'll harm you without you knowing. And I think one of the tools I've been part of implementing recently at a client is also a log analyzer, which has some AI built in, so they can actually start analyzing incoming attacks, etc., runtime as well. So you also build that part into your understanding and future products, and that's becoming quite powerful as well. So that for sure, security has a high spot in that setup as well, in my mind.
Yeah, and to that point, I think one of the best things to come out of the kind of DevOps revolution is that shifting left, and because security, in most cases, like in any good operation, security is part of the equation. Shifting that left and making that part of the continuous conversation as well.
For sure.
All right, so I wanted to sort of start to wind down, but I wanted to find out, like, what am I not asking you? What question should I be asking you? That companies should focus on, and what are they missing?
I think you should ask me about what is the biggest impediment for going DevOps in an organization. And my response to that would be, you need to get your budgeting and your way of approaching doing software development into a different mindset than a classical organizational breakdown. Because that's where you allocate funding to projects, you allocate it to different departments and so on. And you need to figure out how to build budgets that actually follow the product and the development of products. And some companies have solved this, but I see a lot of the traditional companies challenge themselves because they are too firm and they can't figure out how to channel the resources to the right places in the organization. So that's for sure one of the big topics on my part. And especially being in, I usually consult with leaders at director or vice president and C-levels, right? That's where I have some great discussions on what you should be doing rather than the traditional financing structure of companies.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and I think with a lot of things, and a lot of areas of DevOps and just progress in general, you run into the problem of, okay, but that's not the way we do things, or that's not the way we've traditionally done things, and you need to get everyone on board with the idea of that we're changing. Just because that's the way we did it doesn't mean that's the way we're going to do it.
No, I absolutely agree, and you also mentioned it earlier that somewhere some executive might say, okay, so we're going DevOps because that is really where the future is heading. But sometimes it's also necessary to understand what you're really asking for and what it means in the you could say engine room of your business. That you want your business people to be very closely related to the development teams, and you want to bridge the whole operations gap and restructure that part.
Okay. What's the biggest question you get when you go to when you're talking with C-level? Like what question do you encounter most often?
Most often I encounter the question of when are we there, right? So I come from an iterative, continuous perspective, right? So getting that question always triggers me a bit because we don't know, quite honestly. We're dealing with cultural change, and they're kind of expecting a project plan because it's so basic in their ways of working. And that's always good fun when you get to that part, I'd say.
Well, and that actually kind of ties back to what I was just saying about like there's the way we've always done things, and so if you're used to saying we're going to do this project, it has a beginning, it has an end. We're going to spend this much money. These are the resources we're going to dedicate to this, and then to shift to have someone come in and say, okay, we're going to adopt this culture. And it's like, okay, well, when does the project end? And it's like, well, it doesn't.
Exactly.
It goes, it's continuous.
Yeah, that's kind of good fun having those discussions. And I think the challenge is often to get the people to understand that, well, if you're dealing with the cultural change, you can't force people to change, right? It's something you have to observe and how far you can go and continuously push the boundaries of what they're doing and their beliefs and attitudes. And then the only part you can do from there is really track it and keep focusing your effort. And that's a big challenge. And that is probably at the heart of why some companies fail going Agile or DevOps, because that's really so ingrown in their habit.
Yeah. Well, and I actually just had a conversation earlier this week and wrote this article about it was about company leadership and transitions there, and like having people leave and having new people come in and how that's perceived by both employees or the outside world. Like it has a perceived negative connotation, like there's volatility in the C-suite and there must be something wrong if people are leaving and the company's making these changes. And I took the conversation and the article from the perspective of DevOps and saying, well, is it a bad thing? Like, it's you did an iteration, you figured out what was working and what wasn't, and now you're reiterating. And and that seems fine. I think that again, it's a kind of a cultural cultural shift for people in terms of mindset, where 30 years ago the idea was you went to school, you got a job, you worked there for 40 years until you were done. And now people tend to switch jobs much more often. 2-3 years, and it's just a shift in mindset in terms of, does that mean, basically it doesn't have to be perceived as that anyone failed or that anyone did anything wrong. It's more like neither you as the employee nor the company as the employer is, married to that choice forever. You can figure out that it's not working and make a change.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in my perspective, what is happening is that we're switching from an output mindset to an outcome mindset. So if we realize that the company is not really getting to the point where it should and could be in the market space, then we need to change the team. We need to change what we're doing to generate the right outcome of our business. And that's where, I totally agree. My parents also told me to get a good education and get a good job and at some point retire at the end of that line, right? But that was focused on output. That was focused on churning stuff out and not churning out getting to a really good outcome. And right. I think that is moving companies right now. So I absolutely agree with your viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I use the analogy of like professional sports teams, I'm here in Houston, and we've got the Houston Rockets basketball team, which they've been very good for a number of years, but very good has only meant they get to the playoffs, they maybe get to the conference finals, mm-hmm. but not good enough to win the whole thing. And eventually, teams have to. And it's a struggle, because on the one hand you look and you go, yeah, but they're really good. They're right up there in the top 2 or 3 every season. They get all the way down to the end before they just can't cross the finish line. And eventually you have to reiterate. You have to sports teams look at that and they say, okay, well, whatever pieces we have in place, they're not enough. We need to shake some things up. Now, unfortunately, the Rockets shook things up so much this year that they're in dead last place.
Oh, well, that's the risk of experimenting for sure. I've followed the NBA for many years. I used to play basketball for 20 years, also personally. So I have a close affinity to that part. But yeah. Anyway.
All right. Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap things up there. But I appreciate you taking the time. And like we said when I think before we started recording, I've spent some time in Europe, but I've never made it to Denmark. So that is definitely on my sort of top 5 to-do list. If we ever get to travel again.
Yeah, for sure. But thank you, Tony, for this great conversation. I always appreciate having a good intellectual discussion on some of the key topics moving right now, so that's cool. And if you ever decide to come to Denmark, I'll make sure to hook you up with a few good proposals on what to see. I'm sure the travel ban will disappear quite soon.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.